All right, we are live. We have Sean, RPH Alley, and Derek Delaney from, well, two places, RPH Alley and PharmD Financial Planning. But I suppose he wants to lead with PharmD Financial Planning, and that's okay, Derek. We're just happy that you're part of RPH Alley, helping all our farms this out with their financials. So, weekly live session. Derek had strep throat last week, so we skipped a week, which is okay. But we left off 2 weeks ago with kind of talking about taxes and businesses, right? And I think it was off camera when we were just jamming afterwards. I had told Derek that, hey, guess what? I have a new business contact in Cabo, and if you go to Cabo now, I get to write off my plane ticket because we're gonna have a meeting with her poolside, and there you go. There's a write off, and you're like, no, not so much. So let's talk about taxes and businesses, Derek. I'm gonna give you the floor because I know nothing.
Yeah. So great question. So there is no shortage of information you can find on like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram of experts giving tax advice on how you can deduct stuff and use it personally and become unbelievably rich in doing so, right? I mean, it takes maybe 2 or 3 videos before I get through a TikTok on my TikTok before I find something like that. And a lot of it is completely wrong. And the IRS is totally aware of what people are trying to do. And they have made rules in Internal Revenue Code to make sure that people can't get away with anything that they're not supposed to. So if you're a business owner, you have every right to make a deduction if it applies to your business. Now, there are 2 big things you have to make sure you hit in order to get that deduction, and that is to make sure that whatever you're deducting is an ordinary expense and it's a necessary expense. So from an ordinary expense, you as a business owner, it has to be an expense that somebody else who owns a similar business would be expected to make, right? And it has to be necessary. So if you're a consultant pharmacist and you're working 100% virtual, chances are you're not going to be allowed to go out and buy a new car and deduct that car as a business expense, and the IRS is going to let that fly if they find out about it. So if you're going to make a business deduction as a business owner, the expense that you're deducting has to be ordinary and necessary for it to be allowable.
Fascinating. So, all right, a lot of us work remotely, right? So let's say you have a car. I like the car example. It's relevant. Now, I believe there's rules between owning and leasing, right? Is there different rules there as far as deductions? And if you have a LLC or some sort of corporation?
Yeah, there are different rules, and I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of all of that. But yeah, there are specific rules for each of those depending on what you're doing and what type of business you're in, essentially.
Well, it sounds like the nitty-gritty is fairly deep, though, right? It's not just, okay, so where you don't want to rely on TikTok, Facebook, all that.
100%. It's taxes in America. The last thing it is easy and simple. So there are different avenues and what ifs and different things that you could go down a rabbit hole on when it comes to anybody's specific situation. So like with everything else, if you find yourself running into something like that, get expert advice and somebody who can help you make a smart decision. Because if the IRS ends up auditing you, they're not going to be very nice with your with your excuse of I just didn't know.
Yeah. Okay. So good example. Back to lease, owning. Another topic. How about, let's say I have to travel up. I'm in San Diego. I have to go to LA for something like that. I mean, so what does that look like when I'm trying to, use that as a business expense?
So as a business expense, it would be 100% deductible. You'd be able to take a lot of those expenses and deduct it if it were truly for business purposes. What gets people in trouble is when business gets combined with personal when they go on these type of business trips. So okay. I have seen a lot of people try to get away with, well, we're going on vacation. I live in Minnesota. If I want to go to California on vacation, I want to bring my entire family. I'm going to set up one business meeting, one coffee with a potential client out there, and then be able to deduct or write off all those expenses, which would be travel, lodging, meals, and everything else. And that just isn't going to fly. Where when it comes to deductions, the first kind of rule of thumb people should be aware of is if you're going somewhere on business and you're going to mix personal pleasure with it, 50% of your time or more needs to be spent doing business stuff in order for those expenses to qualify as a deduction. And then the second thing I think that's important to know is if you bring family members with you, unless it's for a specific business reason, you are not able to deduct their expenses. So like their plane ticket to travel with you, even if you're doing a lot of business while on the trip over 50% of the time.
Interesting. Okay. How about 3-day seminar, attack on 2 extra days on the backside because they're throwing some sort of summit on Hawaii?
Yeah. So it depends on when the business takes place. If the business that you're doing bookends kind of when you get there and when you leave, and you have some personal time in the middle, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you categorize and track the business expenses and the personal expenses. So if you take a client out to supper and you have to travel from your hotel to the restaurant and everything in between for business purposes, you're going to want to make sure that those expenses are kept separate from the personal expenses. So I would always recommend somebody use your credit card that's hooked to a business account or a business debit card for those business expenses, and then use personal credit cards or personal debit cards for those personal expenses. So it's a clear delineation between the two. And
Makes
if you
sense.
spend more than 50% of your trip on business expenses, you will be able to deduct the travel there and back if that's the case, usually. Now, again, there are a few what if scenarios that you're going to want to be aware of, but generally that's the case.
Well, pharmacists can come up with a million what if scenarios, so I'll save you that one, Derek, for your clients. But
yeah,
awesome. No, I think that's helpful because when I mentioned that, you were like, "No, hang on, Sean. No, that's not a 20-minute business call or even an hour is not gonna get to that 50% mark that you need." Interesting. Okay.
And it doesn't mean you can't try. It's just that it's going against the rules and it's kind of against the law to do it, but that hasn't stopped people in the past. And I imagine there's probably plenty of people who have gotten away with it over and over again, where it just becomes habit for them. And then those people end up giving advice to other people. And then that kind of train of advice continues on before somebody down the line eventually gets burned. So it's important for people to know that before it gets to that point.
Fascinating. No, that's good. Thank you, Derek. All right. Anything else on this topic?
Yeah. I just want to repeat again, anything that has to do with taxation from a business standpoint, unless you're in the field practicing quite often, rules are always changing, regulations are always changing. So I always recommend if you're going to make a big decision, whether that's writing a big expense off or anything else, talk to a professional, whether that's a CPA or a trusted financial advisor who has a history with taxation. Talk to somebody who knows what's going on, who can give you good advice that will save you from all the headaches that will come from making poor decisions in the future.
That's awesome, Derek. Appreciate your time. If you want to catch Derek, he's online a lot, LinkedIn, but more importantly, he's got a channel on RPH Ally where he drops a lot of this information in there for free. So just join at rphally.com, catch up with Derek. He's here to help you. So thank you, Derek, for your time, and we will see you next week at 11:30 Pacific.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it, Sean.
All right. Thank you, Derek.